Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Matt, and today I have a pretty cool thing to show you. What I've been working on in the last really 4 to 6 weeks is a keg monitoring system similar to Plaato. If you're not familiar, it's essentially a scale that will fit under your keg, and it will tell you how much beer is left in the keg, so there's no more guesswork. Also, you can set up alerts, like it will text you notifications with certain volumes. So if you want it to send you a text when it's like under a gallon, so you can plan your next brew day, it will do that. And also I set up a notification to even show how much you pour. So if you're pouring like a 10-ounce glass, it will even send you a text notification saying, hey, you just poured a 10-ounce glass of beer. So it's a really, really cool system. It's totally DIY. You do not need to know how to program or code, and you really need to know very little about electronics too. I'm gonna outline everything in the video, how to do from software to hardware. But anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you like these types of videos, make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. There'll be more of this content coming in the future. Before we get into the video, I wanted to do a quick high-level overview of what we're going to be setting up in the video so you understand why we're doing what and how things talk to each other. So before we get started too, check the description below. I'm going to have all the parts you'll need to purchase for this. And then all the tools you'll need to set this up. So it all centers around Home Assistant server. Home Assistant is a Linux operating system that you're going to have to install on a virtual machine. If that sounds like gibberish, don't worry, I'm going to walk through how to set this up in the next part of the video. On the right hand side, these are the two hardware components that I'm going to have you buy. We have a Node MCU 8266 microcontroller, and then we have a HX711 amplifier with some load cells. The load cells is what's going to be taking the weight measurements. It's going to go to the amplifier, and then the amplifier is going to connect to the Node MCU. The Node MCU is kind of like the brain of the whole system here, and it's going to be communicating with Home Assistant server via MQTT. To set this up, we're going to be using a software called Tasmota. On the left-hand side, this is how we can connect to the Home Assistant server. So you set up a Home Assistant server, and then you connect to the Home Assistant server with a Home Assistant client. The client can be installed on any like laptop or tablet. So if you have a phone, you can install Home Assistant like via Google Play Store or Apple App Store. But you can also connect to the Home Assistant server via your web browser. A lot of the configurations we're going to use is through the web browser, and then at the end of the video where you're going to actually be seeing your measurements, you're going to be using your phone or your tablet. We're first going to set up the Home Assistant server installation. So there's a few different images here. There's a VirtualBox, a VDI image, or a VMware Workstation image. We're going to continue setting up for VirtualBox, so we're going to go ahead and click on that and get that downloaded. Next, we're going to have to install VirtualBox. So we're going to want to install VirtualBox on the Windows host. So go ahead and click on this. And we're going to also need the VirtualBox extension pack. So we're going to go ahead and download this. So those are the 3 files you need to get started here. And all the links will be in the description below. I already pre-installed VirtualBox. So we're going to go ahead and open up the folder with my downloads. And we can double click on the extensions pack. This will open up VirtualBox and get the extension pack installed for you. So it's pretty simple. Go ahead and click agree. And then we're going to restart VirtualBox. All right, so once VirtualBox is started up, we can click new. For the type, we're going to select Linux. And for the version, we can do other Linux 64-bit. The name can be anything you want. This is just the name of the virtual machine. We're going to call it Home Assistant. Click next. This can be default. For the hard disk, we're going to select an existing hard disk and hit add here. And we're going to select the file we downloaded from the internet, so that virtual disk image. We can go ahead and copy that path, grab it, open it here, and select choose, click create. So it's all loaded up, but we don't want to start it yet. We want to go to settings. We can go to network first, go to advanced. We're going to select bridge adapter, and then for promiscuous mode, we're going to allow all. We're going to hit OK to save those settings. Go back into settings. And for system, we're going to enable EFI. Once those settings are selected, we can go ahead and start up the virtual machine. The first time you start this up, depending on how fast the machine you're running the virtual machine on, might take a few minutes. Mine took only about 2 minutes. And you know you're all set when you see the Home Assistant window. This is pretty much all you're going to see on this window. This is the Home Assistant server. You'll see an IP address, so you'll know that it's on the internet. You can connect to the server by going to your browser and just typing the IP address, colon, and then the port, so the 8123. So we're going to have to register an account here, so we're going to just name mine Matt. And this is just the default account you're going to use to log into Home Assistant. So we're going to create a password here and confirm the password. Click Create Account. For down here, this is just more settings. So I live in the United States, so we're going to switch it to Imperial. My time zone is in the New York time zone, so Eastern United States. Currency will be USD. Find that, and then we can go ahead and hit Next. This is, we can ignore that, hit Next, and then Finish. And then this is the Home Assistant server. So you're using the web client to connect to the Home Assistant server. So we're going to go ahead and get some add-ons installed by clicking on Configuration. And click Add-ons here. Down at the bottom right, you'll see Add-on Store. There's only 2 add-ons we're interested in installing. The first one is MQTT, so the mosquito broker. This is how you're going to get your Node MCU to communicate with your Home Assistant server. Once that's installed, you can go ahead and start that up. And the other thing we're going to need is something to edit the YAML files. So the Studio Code server will do just that, so go ahead and find that, get that installed. So we're going to go ahead and check those boxes. The last thing we're going to want to do is we're going to have to set up a user account for the MQTT broker. So you can go to Configurations, Add User, and we're going to create MQTT-user. You can name this whatever you'd like. I'm just naming it MQTT-user. You're going to have to make it log in and create a password. So we're just going to set a password here and then hit Create. Once you have the user account created for MQTT, you just need to set this up in the add-on. So you can go to Configurations, Settings, Restart your server. And then once it restarts, you're going to want to go down to Notifications and hit the Check It Out, and it should detect the MQTT service. You can hit Configure and Submit. It's going to start up that service. And then on the right-hand side, you can hit Configure. We're going to want to reconfigure MQTT, and then for the username, you're going to type in the username that you created. So mine is MQTT-user, and then type the password in, and then hit Submit. And that now MQTT is all set up, so we can go ahead and start working on some hardware. Next, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the hardware section, which I think is the fun part. So you're going to need some plywood. I'm using inch-thick plywood, but you can use really any plywood you have laying around. If you need to go buy some, though, I would recommend buying an inch thick. And you can go ahead and get your load cells out of the packaging, and you're going to need to mount them on the back of the piece of plywood. So I'm using a 3D printed brackets, which I'll put it in the description, a link to this for the 3D printed files. If you don't have a 3D printer, though, don't worry, it's no big deal. You can just chisel out a space for the load cell to deform into, and you can just screw into both sides of the load cell, and that should hold it into place just fine. The load cells do need to deform. As you see, the middle portion of a load cell just kind of bends when there's weight put on it, and that tells the load cell and the amplifier how much weight's on the load cell. So they definitely need to deform. So all of mine are in brackets, so we're going to go ahead and position these around equal space. That doesn't need to be perfect, but try to get as equal as you can, space between each other, and then we're going to mark little holes as we're going to drill some pilot holes for our wood screws to screw into these brackets. And I would still recommend the same thing even if you don't have these 3D printed brackets, as you don't want to crack this piece of plywood as you're drilling the screws into. After you pre-drilled your screw holes, we can go ahead and start mounting the brackets on the piece of plywood. So I have some small wood screws I just had laying around, so we're going to go ahead and hand screw all of these wood screws in. We also want to make sure that the cables are facing towards the center. Once all the load cells are screwed into the plywood, we can go ahead and mark each load cell with a number 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is going to help knowing where to wire this and how to wire it. This is called a Wheatstone bridge, but pretty much all you need to know is the white connections go up and then the black connections go sideways. So we're going to do white, black, going clockwise around the plywood. So now it's time to start soldering wires, and if you've never done this before, it's not hard at all. You're just going to want to plug in your soldering iron, and the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to free up a little bit more space on these wires. They have a little bit of wire sticking out, but I like to free up a little bit more space. So if you take the wire and just score the rubber sheath, you could stick it in your mouth and bite the rubber and kind of like pull the wire. It takes a little bit of practice to get this right, but I found this is a pretty good way to strip the wires. If you have a tool to strip these thin of wires, and obviously use that. I didn't have any of that, so I just kind of scored it and pulled the rubber with my teeth. After you've freed up both sections of the wire, you want to twist them together, and we can set these to the side. I like to try to put this in a comfortable position for me, as I don't have 3 hands. You'll need 2 free hands to do the soldering. So with the soldering iron in one hand and the solder in the other ones, you pretty much want to get a glob of solder onto the wire. The one thing that when doing this the first time, you kind of need to use a decent amount of solder for the glob to be thick enough to pull off of the soldering iron, and it doesn't need to look pretty at all. There are connections that will need to look a little bit nicer than this, so this is a good time to practice your soldering. After each side is soldered together, the white, black, we can go ahead and take a piece of electrical tape and tape around each solder connection. You don't need to do this. This is just something that I do just because it makes me feel safer about my crappy soldering job. So I just wrap some electrical tape around each connections to make sure that they would hold in place. Once each soldering point is electrical taped and you feel nice about those connections, we can move on to the next part, and that's just cleaning up the wires to make this a little bit more manageable. So you're going to go to each side, each white, black side, and kind of wrap it up to however you want to. I just kind of did this little bow tie thing on each side, and then grabbed a piece of electrical tape and taped them together. And I did this on all 4 sides. At this point, this is what it should look like with everything soldered together and taped up. The next thing we got to do is we need to attach DuPont connectors to all of the red wires. The red wires are going to attach to the HX711 amplifier. So we're going to have to add these DuPont connectors. So you're going to have to break out that DuPont connector kit from Amazon I recommended. If you already have these laying around, then good for you. I did not, since I've never done this before. So we're going to have to go ahead and start walking through that connection process. So in your kit, they're going to have these little metal connectors. We're going to be making female connections. So you're going to want to grab the female connection components. So we're going to break off 4 of these components here and get them free from the casings. Next, we want to grab our crimping tool, and we can grab a wire. As I mentioned before, all the wires come pre-stripped, and the pre-strips that come for the red wires are sufficient for the DuPont connectors. We don't have to strip them anymore. With the crimping tool, we want to take the metal part of the DuPont connector and go to the smallest side, put it in the slot, and pull it all the way so the tip of the back of the DuPont connector sits and connects with the lip of the crimping tool. Next, we want to feed the red wire into the female connector and get it so the DuPont connector crimps onto the red wire and also has contact with the wire. After you have all 4 red wires crimped together, we want to take the black single connectors out of the DuPont connecting kit and slide them on. This part is pretty difficult to do, unfortunately. What I did is I slipped them on and pushed it in as far as I could go, but you actually need to take something thin. I was using actually the male connectors that I was going to solder onto the HX711 amplifier and kind of push the DuPont female connector deeper into the actual jack here. And it's really hard to know when it's there. You need to push it, but there's essentially a little black clip on the black outer shell of the female DuPont connector that needs to click down. If it's hard to see here, and I would recommend, if this isn't clear enough for you, just to watch a YouTube video on how to install DuPont connectors, because that will walk you through step by step on how to do this. And this is how it should look like for the 4 red wires. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take out these L-shape male connectors from the DuPont connecting kit from Amazon, and we're going to use these to get these installed on the amplifier. So you want to break off a section of 4, so 2 4 pieces here. So go ahead and set these 2 4 pieces into the amplifier and flip it over so the weight of the amplifier kind of holds everything in place. And this is where you kind of need to be precise. So you're going to want to put a ugly glob of solder on each of the tips of the 4 connector points, and then we can kind of pretty it up after we got enough solder on each of the 4 connector points. So it doesn't need to look pretty here. We're just going to try to put a decent glob of solder on each of these 4 points. If it gets stuck to it, you can kind of just touch it with your soldering iron and it'll free it up. So now we got 4 giant chunks of solder here. The next thing we're going to want to do is reheat each soldering point, and it will kind of liquefy the solder, and you can now make it look a little nicer. You just want to make sure that the solder doesn't merge with other pools of solder. You want these to be 4 individual connections. So you can see how I'm kind of taking like the big chunk of solder, soldering it into an actual ball, and then pushing that ball on the board. It's still not a great looking connection, but it will work fine as long as the male connectors on the amplifier don't wiggle around, and there's good contact, and the globs of solder don't mesh with each other. It will be a fine soldering job. I've never soldered before, so they look pretty ugly, but they do just fine. So please don't feel intimidated if you've never done this before. It doesn't need to look nice. After this side is complete, we obviously have to go and flip it around and do the exact same thing to the other side. Just be careful, as the board can get actually pretty warm when doing this. So just be careful where you're touching, and obviously always be mindful of where you're putting your soldering iron. As I've definitely made the mistake of putting the soldering iron on things they shouldn't be on, and then things melt. So be very cautious of where you set this. Now we need to connect the 4 red wires from each load cell to the amplifier. You want to connect cell 1 to the A- terminal, cell 2 to the E+ terminal, cell 3 to the A+ terminal, and cell 4 to the E- terminal. If you find that the DuPont connectors are not snug and they kind of fall off or wiggle around, that means you didn't push the metal ends of the DuPont connectors when you use the crimping tool. You didn't push those on deep enough into the black casings. So you need to kind of, like I mentioned, take a wire and shove those deeper into the black casings. The next thing you're going to want to do is, out of your kit, it should come with a bunch of this wire. You're going to want to strip off 4 individual strands, and you can keep it however long as you want. I'd recommend just keeping it the length that comes in the box, as it's nice to run the Node MCU outside the freezer. It's just one less component that can get wet, so it gives you peace of mind with that component. Similarly with the red wire, we need to now add the DuPont connectors to all 4 of these wires on both ends. These wires are much easier to install because they're much thicker. So I found with these is you just take it, you kind of roll the wire with your finger while the blade is on the rubber of the wire, and then you can just use your teeth to pull off the wire. Again, it's a practice thing, and once you do it a few times, you'll figure it out. After all 8 DuPont connectors are on the longer wires, we can go ahead and go back to the bottom of the scale. I like to do even more cable management, so I get a hot glue gun and put a glob of hot glue on each side and stick where the tape is at on the piece of plywood. And this is just so the cables can't wiggle around underneath the scale once it's all installed. At this point, this is what it should look like. I wouldn't glue the red wires together yet, as we want to make sure this is working before we get it all glued down. But at this point, the scale is about 95% complete. We're going to go ahead and jump into wiring the amplifier to the Node MCU. Before we get started connecting the amplifier to the Node MCU, we want to make sure this scale rests flat. So go ahead and flip the scale over and find a flat surface, and make sure the scale isn't teetering on one side or two sides. If it is teetering, just go back, flip it around, and either loosen the screws on the sides that are too far, or tighten the screws on the points that are resting on the table. When you're ready to wire up, just look at the diagram on the screen. You can pause the video now and just connect the DuPont connectors accordingly. Next, we need to flash the Node MCU. Go ahead and go to the description and get Tasmotizer 1.2. It's from Tasmota. And go ahead and get that installed. I already have mine installed. Once that's installed, right-click and run as administrator. And at this point, you're going to want to select release and then select Tasmota sensors.bin, and then check the self-resetting device Node MCU box. Plug your Node MCU into the computer and then check what ports are available. Hit the refresh button, and whatever COM port was added, that is the Node MCU. Go ahead and hit Tasmotize, and we're going to let this flash the Node MCU. This is pretty much setting up an interface. You can interface with the Node MCU over the network. Once it's all done, you can hit OK on the process successful, and then we can hit send config. The first thing we want to do is send Wi-Fi credentials. So for the SSID, this is your Wi-Fi name. So mine is Bill Y, the Science Fi. So make sure that the spelling and the spacing is correct, and then the password is just your Wi-Fi password. If this isn't right, you won't be able to communicate with this over the network. The next thing we want to do is we want to hook up the MQTT information. Remember when we installed that MQTT add-on on Home Assistant over the web browser? This is essentially connecting to that instance. So go ahead and type in your Home Assistant server IP, and that's in the black window, so the Oracle VM VirtualBox window. You can see that. The topic can be whatever you want. I just named mine Keg 2 since this is the second keg I'm setting up. Just pay attention to the spell or the capitalization on the topic. And then for the username and password, this is that MQTT user that you created when setting up the MQTT add-on. Once you hit OK, it's going to reset the Node MCU. And now we can hit Get IP. And this is the IP address that's assigned to your Node MCU. So now we can connect to the Node MCU through the your browser window by just typing in the IP address. And now this is a direct interface to the Node MCU. So now we can start to configure the node through this web browser. So if you hit configure module, the first thing you want to do is select the module type. We're going to select generic 18. Go ahead and hit save. Once you hit save, it's going to restart, so give it a few seconds here. The next thing we're going to do is go back to configure module, and then we're going to have to set up some pins. So we used the D2 pin. So we're going to go ahead and select the D2 GPIO4 and select the HX711 DAT. And then for the D1 GPIO5, we're going to select the HX711 SCK. When you got those selected, go ahead and hit save, and it's going to restart again. After restarting, you should now, when logging into the Tasmotizer or Tasmota instance on your Node MCU, you should now see an HX711 weight with a kilogram. This number will most likely be wrong, and that's fine. Go ahead and go to console. There's a few commands we're going to want to do. First of all, the first one is teleperiod 30. And teleperiod is just saying how often do you want to send the weight data to your Home Assistant server. So teleperiod 30 just means it's going to return every 30 seconds. This can be however often you want. If you're going to use the pour notifications, I'd recommend a minimum of 30 seconds. The other command you're going to want to do is you're going to want to calibrate your scale. And you can calibrate it by using the sensor 34, 2, and then this is the calibration weight we're going to use. You can grab anything in your house as long as you just know the weight of it. So I have another scale at home, a sensitive scale. I think I used an empty CO2 tank. You want to measure this in grams. So the empty CO2 tank weighed 3,450 grams. Before you send this command and you have the weight ready, make sure that there's nothing on the scale. When you hit enter, it's going to say load weight. You're going to set the weight on, and then it's going to say calibrated. If it fails to calibrate, that might mean that something is wrong with the wiring. I would go back in the video and double check the wiring if it's failing. So at this point, you have the Node MCU sending the weight data every 30 seconds to Home Assistant, and you also have calibrated your scale. So now when you go back to the main menu and you put some weight, this number should go up. If you notice that in the console, that when you put weight on the scale and the weight, this number goes down, and when you take things off, this number goes up, that means that the wiring may need to be swapped. So remember when we're doing white, black from 1, 2, 3, 4 on the weight cells, those might have to be swapped to black, white. Typically it's white, black when doing the connections, but if the wiring was reversed at the manufacturer of the load cells, you may have to swap that configuration if this is reading backwards. Now what we want to do is we want to find the value that it would take to zero out this scale. So go ahead and grab an empty keg and put your gas connector and your liquid connector on this keg. Put the empty keg on top of the scale and then wait for the weight to report. You're looking at this weight raw value. You're going to copy that number, whatever that number is, on a notepad. So let's say that this is the weight that it's reporting with the empty keg and the connectors on it. So we're going to take this number, copy it, open up a notepad, and just put it to the side for now. We're going to need that in a minute. If the scale is working, go ahead and clean up the red wires and hot glue them to the plywood. Also hot glue the HX711 amplifier to the back of the plywood as well. From this point on, if you haven't done so already, you can move the scale into your freezer in your final location. What I typically recommend is you put something underneath the scale, as the installation can deform with weight over time. So I actually put a thin piece of plexiglass underneath the scale. I set the scale on there, and then I just taped the wires along the side of the freezer. And I kind of just let the Node MCU dangle on the side of the freezer, but you can tape it or whatever you want to make it a little bit more manageable on the side. Next, we're going to go into Home Assistant. Go ahead and open up Studio Code Server. The first time you open this up, you might have to click OK or get this set up, but it's pretty straightforward if I remember correctly. Open up your configurations.yaml file. This configurations.yaml file is where you're going to put all your sensor code. And you can go into the description of this video and just copy and paste this code under the sensor icon here. I'm going to break these down on each one of these three and explain to you how these work, just so you have a better understanding of why we're doing what. So we have three platforms here. So we have an MQTT platform, we have an MQTT platform, and then we have a statistics platform. To go line by line, so this is taking the MQTT data that's being reported from your Node MCU. We're giving it a name, so it's keg 1 ounces. So this is going to show how many ounces are in the keg. The state topic is the MQTT line that it's listening for. So if you go back into the Tasmota Console, you'll notice that this is exactly the same as this here. You want to make sure that it is case sensitive. So the sensor needs to be capitalized. If you named it capital K, lowercase e, lowercase g1, it needs to show the same here. So you're going to have to replace this value on your own side if you did not name it exactly capital K lowercase e g 1. The value template is the calculation we're doing on this value that's getting sent. So we're taking the raw weight value from the HX711 amplifier, which is this value here, that's getting reported. And then we're taking the number, so this raw weight value, and we're subtracting the weight of the scale and the empty keg. And then we're taking that value and multiplying it by 0.0338. And then we're taking that value and rounding it by 1. This is the calculation you're going to use to take your milliliters, which is what the raw weight value is reading, and convert it into fluid ounces. Similarly, with this we're doing the same exact calculation, but instead of multiplying the value by 0.338, you're multiplying it by 0.000264, rounding it by 2, and this reports the amount of gallons that's left in the keg. The last thing is the statistics. So we're just giving it, the platform is called statistics. We're naming it keg1 pour. The entity is the sensor.keg1 ounces. That is the sensor.keg1 ounces. So it's taking the value from this here. It's measuring the change sample, so the change between two numbers that are stored in the statistics database. The sampling size is 2, so it's only going to hold on to the 2 most recent values. And the precision is just saying the amount of decimal points it's listening to. The precision needs to be the same as this number here. So if you want the ounces to repoint 2 decimal places, you need to make sure that you update the precision here to 2. Again, this is just to understand what the code is doing. If you don't care, just copy and paste it directly into your sensor thing. Verify that this matches what your MQTT data is sending, and make sure to update this float number with the number you got from the raw weight value from your scale and an empty keg with the gas and liquid line connected. Anytime you add code or change anything, you need to restart the server before you'll see these changes anywhere else in the system. So once you add the code, make sure to go to configurations, settings, and then restart. Are you sure you want to restart? Hit OK. And then this is going to restart Home Assistant server. You got to give it a few seconds here. You'll know when it's restarted because you'll see all of these refresh. If you try to restart and you get an error down below, that's because there's something wrong with your code, and it won't let you continue because it detects an error in this configuration.yaml file. Go ahead and go back to the configurations YAML file if you get an error and just double check your code. Make sure you copied everything you needed to copy. If you didn't get an error and you restarted, then we can go ahead and go into overview, hit the top right hand corner, edit dashboard, and hit add card. You can go ahead and use any of these cards if you want, but I'm using the entities card. You can call this whatever you'd like, so we're going to just say keg data. And then we're going to want to delete the pre-filled in entities here. So we can go to entities and we want to choose some entities here. And these are going to come directly from your configuration.yaml file, the 3 things we just made and added in there and restarted. So we're going to be looking for keg1 gallon. We're going to add keg1 ounces and keg1 pour. We're going to go ahead and hit save and hit done. You can go ahead and now test this out. So this data is being sent every 30 seconds. So go ahead and put some weight on the scale or put a full keg on the scale, and it should report the gallons and ounces and the pour. The pour updates every 30 seconds, and it pretty much just takes the difference between the 2 most recent sample values that are sent to Home Assistant. So this should fluctuate, this will fluctuate between like 0.1 to 0.5 fluid ounces plus negative, because as the freezer or fridge or kegerator kicks on and off, the weight will fluctuate a little bit. Don't be shocked if you see the fluid ounces fluctuate around 10 fluid ounces up and down. Unfortunately, that's just how the load cells work under when the fridge is kicked on and off. So don't be shocked if you see a little bit of fluctuation here. Next, we want to set up notifications to go to your phone. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go on your phone and install Home Assistant. You can go to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, just search for Home Assistant and install it. Once you open up Home Assistant, as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi network, it will actually automatically detect the Home Assistant server running in the background. Go ahead and connect to the Home Assistant server and log in with your username and password that you set up. Once you're in, you'll see all the data that's on this home page. We need to make sure that we install Home Assistant on your phone, because if you don't install Home Assistant on your phone, your notifications won't be able to go to your phone since there's no app on the phone. So once you have Home Assistant installed on your phone, we can go ahead and go to Configuration, Automations and Scenes, and Add Automation. When you add automation, you can pretty much copy what I have here. So I have Keg Pour notification. So if we edit this, you can just copy this or name it however you want. So I just have Keg 1 Pour notification. Once you name the automation, we now need to set up a trigger. So what is going to trigger the notification to happen? So we're going to go to the trigger type and select numeric state. We're going to select the Keg 1 Pour sensor. So remember, the Keg 1 Pour is that statistics sensor we set up in the configuration.yaml file. This is what's taking the two most recent values and just finding the difference. So it's gonna listen to this sensor and check the value. If the value is below 3 ounces and above 30 ounces, it's going to trigger the action. You can set this to whatever you want. Like if you want it to trigger every if it detects less than 1 ounce, it will trigger. Or if you want it to be it won't report unless it's 5 ounces, you just do -5. The -30 is optional. You don't have to have this here. But I find that sometimes when you restart Home Assistant, you'll get spammed with notifications. So this kind of helps with the spam. The actions is what it will look like is what's down here. You won't see this here, up here. You'll see this. So the first thing we want to do is under action type, we want to call a service. We're going to have to now select a service. And since you installed Home Assistant on your phone, Home Assistant is now going to be able to interact with your phone. So you're going to look for a value similar to this. So notification, sending notification via mobile app, Matt's phone. So that's my phone. So we're going to select that notification. You're going to want to set a title. So we're just going to call, say, Keg 1 Pour detected. And then under the message, if you go into the description, you're just going to copy this here. So you just poured states sensor Keg 1 Pour. So this is going to just read whatever the value is. So if the difference of the value, the two most recent values, is more than 3 ounces, it's just going to take that value and send it to your phone. So go ahead and copy this line from the description, throw it right up here, and then you'll notice it will change this edit in YAML. Just make sure it looks like this, and then you can hit save. So that's the pour notification. Going back, now we want to set up notifications to send if your keg is below a certain volume. So under keg warning, you can create a keg warning or keg whatever you want to call it. And we're using a numeric state trigger as well. So select numeric state. We're going to be reading, you can read from either the keg 1 ounces or the keg 1 gallons. We'll just switch it to keg 1 gallons just to make it easier. And then you can set this to below whatever you want. So this is just taking, it's listening to the keg 1 gallons, and if it's below 1 gallon, then it's going to trigger the action. And all the action is it's a call service. You want to select your mobile phone. So if you go down here, just look for the notification, sending a notification via mobile. And then title is just going to be keg 1 warning, and then the message will say keg 1 has less than 1 gallon left. And obviously you can change this value to report for 3 gallons or report to, 4 gallons. If you want it to be a little bit more specific, then you can choose the ounces. So we can go to listen to keg 1 ounces, and let's say if you want to report if it's less than 100 ounces. So however you want it to be. We're going to just keep it to gallons though. So keg 1 gallons below 1 gallon, and then hit save. At this point, you should now have your notification to send to your phone if it's under 1 gallon. And then you should also have the notification set up to text you when there's a pour detected. If you want to test these, you can go ahead and hit run action. You'll now see the notification on your phone. So double check these, make sure they're working. If you're getting the notification on your phone, then you're all set up. If you're not getting the notification on your phone, then I'm assuming you need to enable some permissions for the Home Assistant application on your phone, just so it has the permission to send you push notifications. If you want to add, more than 1 keg, you just copy and paste another set of code. So this is my keg 1 sensor. So I have the ounces reporting, gallons reporting, and statistics for the pour. And I just copied and pasted it again, but now I call it keg 2 ounces, and it's listening to the keg 2 sensor. And depending on how many sensors you set up, so like this is the console for keg 1, and then this is the console for keg 2. And these are the 2 different node MCUs I have running out of my freezer. You can do this to however many you want. You just keep copying these and keep making new sensors. One final comment on the keg 1 pour. So this reports, remember the MQTT data reports every 30 seconds to the Home Assistant server. And it just takes the difference between the 2 most recent values. So it is possible that mid-pour, your data gets sent to the Home Assistant server. If that's the case, then your pour data will obviously be off. So the 30 seconds is hopefully won't report to Home Assistant mid-pour. Obviously, if you want to bump this up to 1 minute, so all you would change is go to the Tasmota Console, and then you would just do teleperiod 60. Then there's less of a chance that an update's going to happen mid-pour. You might just have to wait longer to receive the notification on your phone between pours. But that about covers it. Thanks so much for watching. I know this was a very, very long video. I thought about breaking this into 2 parts, but I figured it would just be better just to have it all in one video. But yeah, if you guys liked the video, make sure to like the video on YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's going to be more content like this coming in the future. If you guys have any questions about anything, really, just post down in the comment section below, or you can check the description and see my email. You can email me whenever you'd like. I check my email about every day. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.